unbelievable. Let's talk to Richard Johnson. Sorry to keep you waiting, Richard. There's so much going on today. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you, Mike?
Yeah, very well indeed. I've got a couple of clips to play you in a moment, but how are you sort of seeing the way things are playing out at the moment? We've got Democratic National Convention where Joe Biden was kind of, you know, rather unceremonially thrown under a bus and told that he couldn't stand to be president again. He was put on so late yesterday that hardly anybody watched it in the US, and it wasn't on prime time. But we got Barack Obama sticking up for Kamala. She's suddenly the new big thing, isn't she?
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary couple of months. I mean, if you think about where the Democrats were 2 months ago, enthusiasm, rock bottom, a sense of fatalism about the Biden candidacy. Very few people would have said to you that Biden is going to stand aside. You had that extraordinary debate. And really, I think that Biden stepping out has changed the race, not in as dramatic a way as I think many Democrats think, but it's basically taken this from a modest Trump advantage to an even race. I think it's, you know, the chances here of either candidate winning is about the same as flipping a coin. And I think one of the potential dangers for the Democrats in the way that they've approached this convention is not to be too triumphalist, because the campaign has not been won, and they might be mistaking their own sense of relief that Biden is no longer the nominee with a view that the American public have fully rallied behind them. They've inched up in the polls, but really it's just a few inches, a few points up in the polls, and it could go either way still over the next couple months. Yeah,
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that the Democrats have been given a boost by getting rid of Joe Biden, because I think there's no doubt that Trump would have absolutely trounced him. It's become a little bit closer, but, you know, we still haven't really seen Kamala Harris doing anything. You know, we haven't heard what she really wants to do if she gets into power. We haven't heard what her policies would be. We haven't really heard much from her about, you know, what her attitude would be towards, you know, Ukraine, towards the Middle East, towards Israel and Gaza, even towards domestic policy. I mean, she's had some very left-wing views in the past, some of which she's said to have given up on, but we don't really know because she hasn't given an interview, she hasn't given a press conference. We haven't had a chance to see her actually talk about it.
No, and you're right that the scrutiny will intensify now over the next few weeks. I mean, if you think about it, the media cycle has been taken up since first you had that debate and then the questions about Biden, will he stay, will he go? Then you had the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, that took up a great deal of attention. Then you had Biden standing down, that took a great deal of attention. Then you had the question of who Kamala Harris was going to choose as her vice presidential nominee, that took up a great deal of attention. That's basically taken us up to where we are now.
Right.
And none of that is really a focus on the substantive, as you say, the substantive policy agenda of Kamala Harris and how she is going to have to do a delicate dance here. She's a member of the current administration. She's been a member of the Joe Biden administration for the last 4 years. So she has to accept what that administration has done, but she also wants to signal herself as a candidate of change and something fresh and new, and so that means she might have to put some distance between what the administration has done, or say she's going to do different things.
Yeah.
She started to do that this week with some announcements about economic policy, but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely right. Let's have a look at Barack Obama, who was talking last night in Chicago.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago. It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
It's funny, isn't it, now that Joe Biden's not in the race anymore, they want to talk about how old Donald Trump is.
Oh, yes. I mean, of course, the age factor had been against the Democrats, and now the table's turned. It is interesting. Of course, Obama is only 3 years older than Kamala Harris, and Harris is 19 years younger than Joe Biden. Actually, next in October, just a couple of weeks before the election, both Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug Emhoff, will both turn 60. They were born a week between each other. Right. So, yeah, the generational game has changed. And I think Harris, you know, she also appears to be more youthful and vibrant than perhaps even as a 60-year-old. So, yeah, of course, the Democrats are going to, after being, tarred with that earlier in the year, now they're ready to turn the tables on the Republicans.
Well, they're very good at turning the tables, because they've very much turned the tables on Joe Biden. As I said, he was pushed into a kind of very late slot on Monday night. He spoke at sort of something like 11 o'clock at night, which meant that he wasn't on prime time. And a lot of American networks have been talking about that and focusing on that. But let's have a look at something which I think is also very telling. Nancy Pelosi last night in the crowd at the convention, when they all started chanting, we love Joe, or whatever it was. Let's have a look. I think we can probably watch that again just because it's so short. But she clearly does not love Joe, clearly doesn't want to be seen loving Joe. I mean, talk about a bulldog chewing a wasp. I mean, she clearly doesn't really think that Joe is a very good idea.
Well, she was the key mover behind moving Joe Biden out of position. And when many people in the Democratic Party thought that Biden had basically successfully put to rest the questions about his ability to be the nominee, Nancy Pelosi goes on national television and says, we're still waiting for the president to make a decision. He'd already said he'd made his decision. She just wanted him to make a different decision. There are people around Joe Biden, his senior advisors, who have already given some interviews that have basically singled her out in all but name. And there is clearly some bad blood between the inner circle of the Biden team and Pelosi. And I think, there are still people around Biden, and perhaps even Biden himself, who don't acknowledge that Biden couldn't have won. They really do think that he could have won this election, and they feel aggrieved.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, many Democrats that I speak to as well are absolutely incensed that because of Biden and because of the way the White House strategist actually made the running for him, there was no primary. There was no choice being given to any Democratic voter about who should be the front runner in the presidential race. So they completely glossed over that. And then when they decided it was time to dump him, they just kind of anointed Kamala Harris and went, oh yeah, she'll do. The woman who we didn't think could be president, never mind vice president, will now be the sort of, anointed one, and she will, be the nominee. And a lot of people are really not happy about that.
You're right that there are people who are unhappy about it, but it is remarkable that if you look at the polling, Democratic voters in the country have pretty much rallied around her. And I do think that even though it may not be great from a perspective of internal democracy, that the party leadership will probably take the lesson from here that maybe it was just as well they didn't have a primary. And if you compare this, people made the historical comparison to the 1968 convention that was also in Chicago, when Lyndon Johnson, the Democratic president, had to stand aside. There was a tough primary, and then eventually his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, was given the nomination. But there were riots in Chicago over this. The peace camp wanted Eugene McCarthy, a senator. Bobby Kennedy had been the front runner and been assassinated 2 months earlier. It was a real mess. And I think there were a lot of Democrats who were a bit worried that the ghost of Chicago 68 would revisit Chicago 2024. But it doesn't really seem to have happened.
No, indeed. I mean, instead they've now got pro-Palestine demonstrators instead. But there we are. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Richard Johnson, Senior Lecturer in US Politics at Queen Mary University.